They ignored her military ID, dismissed her service dog, and called her a liar, until a four-star general walked into court and brought the room to silence. The early morning mist hung low over Glenn County, Georgia, as Aisha Lynette Brooks adjusted her grip on the steering wheel. The silence inside her pickup truck was broken only by the faint hum of the engine and the gentle panting of Shadow, her black Labrador service dog, resting calmly in the passenger seat. She glanced at the dashboard clock. 7:14 a.m. Her appointment at the VA clinic was in 30 minutes, just enough time to grab a coffee and maybe a bagel on the way. Aisha, 33, had only been back home for 3 weeks. After 11 years in the Marine Corps and multiple combat tours as one of the few female snipers in the elite scout sniper platoons, she had finally accepted a medical retirement. Her left leg, damaged during a rescue operation outside Fallujah, never quite healed the same, and the pain had become a constant companion. But the bigger adjustment wasn't physical. It was learning how to blend back into a world that barely understood what she'd been through. She wore a gray hoodie, loose cargo pants, and a Marine Corps baseball cap pulled low. Her face remained calm, composed, her dark brown eyes constantly scanning, out of habit more than fear. She'd seen more in war than most people saw in a lifetime, but civilian life had a different kind of unpredictability, one she couldn't always prepare for. Shadow stirred as she turned onto Crestwood Avenue, where the local diner was already buzzing with early risers. The streets were quiet, mostly older folks walking dogs, sprinklers hitting neatly trimmed lawns, and kids biking past with backpacks. Normal. That was what she wanted, just a little normal. Aisha parked by the curb and stepped out carefully, her knees stiff as it adjusted to the weight. She reached back to grab Shadow's leash and her VA-issued medical folder, tucking it under her arm. As they headed toward the bakery across the street, she barely noticed the 2 police cruisers parked a few blocks down. But someone else had noticed her. Inside one of the homes, a man stood at the window, holding his phone and staring. To him, a black woman with a bike and a military-style gait limping across his neighborhood didn't feel right. She looked like she might be casing houses. Maybe a threat, maybe a thief. She had something strapped to her side, a medical pouch for Shadow, but from a distance, it looked like it could be a weapon. He dialed 911. Aisha was browsing the bakery's counter when the sirens hit her ears. Loud, close. 2 police SUVs sped down the street and came to a screeching halt just outside. Her instinct told her to stay calm, make no sudden movements. Still, something in her gut twisted. Shadow sat obediently at her side as the door burst open. 2 officers, both white, stormed in with hands on their holsters. "You, step away from the counter. Hands where I can see them." Confused, Aisha raised her hands slowly. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Don't talk, just keep your hands visible," one barked. She calmly tried to explain. "My name is Sergeant Major Aisha Brooks, United States Marine Corps, retired. I have my—" "Enough! Hands behind your back. Now!" The younger officer grabbed her arm, twisting it back. Shadow began barking, protective but not aggressive, causing one cop to threaten, "Control your dog or we'll shoot it." Within seconds, she was shoved outside, cuffed roughly, forced to her knees on the cold pavement. Her hoodie was yanked off, revealing the scar across her shoulder and the faded tattoo, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the Marines. People on the sidewalk had stopped to watch. One woman pulled out her phone, whispering to a friend, "She said she's a veteran. They didn't even check." Aisha said nothing. She stared straight ahead, jaw locked. This wasn't her first battle, but it was the first time she'd been treated like an enemy on home soil. As they shoved her into the back of the squad car, one of the officers muttered, "Bet she made that military story up." Shadow barked louder. The ride to the precinct was quiet, save for the crackle of the police radio and the occasional bark from Shadow, who had been leashed and secured in a separate vehicle. Aisha sat stiffly in the back seat of the squad car, wrists aching from the tight cuffs, her jaw clenched, but her expression remained unreadable. Years of Marine training wouldn't allow her to break down, not even in a moment like this. Officer Daniels, the younger of the 2 who had arrested her, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. There was suspicion in his eyes, but also something else, maybe discomfort, doubt. His partner, Sergeant Holt, however, radiated the kind of smug certainty that came from years of assuming guilt before facts. "She really thinks a hoodie and a tattoo makes her a Marine," Holt scoffed. "Probably one of those stolen valor types. These fakes get real bold nowadays." Aisha didn't respond. She focused on the rhythmic breathing she'd learned to steady herself with in combat. In the mirror, her cap with the embroidered Marine Corps emblem stared back at her. Mud-stained, weather-worn, but earned. She'd lost friends for that cap, bled for it, and now it meant nothing to these men. By the time they reached the precinct, the sidewalk outside was already busy. Someone had clearly tipped off a few local reporters, maybe the bakery employee who had whispered, "You don't have to do this," as she was let out, or the bystander filming with the green hoodie. News travels fast when it smells of injustice. They dragged her out roughly, her leg buckled slightly, but she refused to cry out. She refused to let them see anything but control. "Name?" a desk officer asked without looking up as they processed her. "Aisha Lynette Brooks," she said calmly. "Spell it." She did. "Charges?" the clerk asked Holt. "Obstruction, resisting arrest, failure to comply, potential impersonation of military personnel. Will confirm," Holt added with a sarcastic twist in his tone. Aisha was taken to holding. She was fingerprinted, photographed. Her personal belongings, including her wallet, military ID, and dog's paperwork, were sealed away in a plastic evidence bag. No one bothered to read any of it. Her cell was cold. The metal bench made her knee throb. But what hurt more was the realization that even in her own country, wearing her country's uniform and insignia, she could be treated as a criminal for simply existing while black. Elsewhere in the station, Shadow sat silently in a small caged kennel, tail unmoving, ears down. The officers hadn't fed him yet. One had jokingly referred to him as a combat mutt. Another had laughed, calling him her emotional crutch. Neither understood the bond between a Marine and her dog. Shadow had saved her life twice. Once overseas when he warned her of an incoming IED, and once back home when the nightmares from PTSD were too much to bear. That bond couldn't be seen in paperwork, but it lived in every breath they took together. Meanwhile, back at the bakery, the video footage of the arrest had already hit social media. The caption read, "Black woman arrested for pretending to be a Marine. She showed them ID. They didn't care. Watch this." Within an hour, the video had over 12,000 views. Within 3, it was at 200,000. Comments poured in. "She's wearing combat boots and a Marine cap. That's not cosplay. Did they not check her ID before slamming her face down? This woman held herself like a trained killer. Those cops just made a mistake." Veterans groups began reposting the video. One ex-Marine recognized her tattoo and posted her old deployment photo alongside it. Aisha, rifle in hand, kneeling in sand, her eyes locked on the horizon. Then someone tagged a high-ranking Marine Corps page with the words, "Y'all gonna stay silent while they humiliate one of your own?" Back in holding, Aisha sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap. She didn't know about the video. She didn't know the world was watching, but she felt it in her gut. Something was shifting. The same instincts that helped her survive sniper missions were whispering now. They messed with the wrong Marine, and the next shot wouldn't be fired from a rifle. It would come in the form of truth, justice, and maybe, if the country still had a soul, accountability. By noon, the footage of Aisha's arrest had spread beyond Georgia's borders and was now catching fire on national platforms. The original video, posted by a teenager named Malik, whose aunt owned the bakery, was being re-uploaded, dissected, and analyzed by content creators, veterans, civil rights attorneys, and enraged citizens alike. Hashtags began trending. Justice for Aisha. Marine not criminal. Black veterans matter. On TikTok, an ex-Marine sergeant named Rico Martinez posted a stitched reaction to the arrest video. The side-by-side comparison showed Aisha being shoved to the ground while Rico, in uniform, stood with his arms crossed in disbelief. His voice cracked with anger. "She's one of us. I know that walk. I bet my damn medals on it. That's no fake. That's a warrior right there. You don't manhandle a Marine. Not ever. And sure as hell not like that." His post was viewed nearly 3 million times in 4 hours. Across the country, the clip landed in group chats of veterans, in inboxes of journalists, and eventually in the hands of retired General Marcus Ellsworth, a 4-star Marine general who had mentored Aisha in her final years of service. At first, he didn't recognize the clip until the camera caught her face as the officers forced her into the squad car. He froze. Aisha Brooks, one of the most decorated female snipers in recent history, a legend in Marine circles, both feared and respected on the field, and a pioneer in breaking through the Corps' male-dominated combat elite. She had saved a unit pinned down in Mosul, earned a Bronze Star for her marksmanship under fire, and even trained at Quantico as an advanced combat tactics instructor. Now she was in a jail cell. He stood from his office chair and immediately made a call to his aide. I want her charges, her arrest report, and the name of every officer involved. Now. Meanwhile, newsrooms scrambled to get ahead of the story. A journalist from the Atlanta Standard, a young black woman named Jamila Rivers, recognized the tattoo in the video and followed her instincts. She cross-referenced military records, then published an article titled, "Decorated Marine Veteran Arrested as Imposter by Local Police. Evidence Ignored." The piece featured images from Aisha's deployments, her confirmed service record, and interviews with other Marines who'd served with her. The article spread like wildfire. Calls flooded Glenn County's police department. Reporters parked outside the courthouse. Protesters began gathering with signs that read, "Salute her, don't shackle her." Is this how we thank our veterans? At the precinct, officers inside the station began growing uneasy. Holt, the arresting officer, seemed agitated now, not out of guilt, but out of fear. "This is getting blown way out of proportion," he muttered to Daniels. "Social media doesn't make laws." Daniels, the younger partner, looked more shaken. He had watched the video on his phone, seen the comments, read the article, and something gnawed at him. He kept replaying the moment Aisha had quietly said, "Sergeant Major Aisha Brooks, Marine Corps." He hadn't even looked at her ID. None of them had. The department's PR representative issued a hollow statement that afternoon. "We are aware of a recent video circulating on social media involving one of our officers. The matter is under internal review. We ask the public to withhold judgment until all facts are confirmed." But it was too late for that. Across town at the VA clinic Aisha had been on her way to, a small shrine of support began forming. Veterans dropped off handwritten signs. One man left his purple heart medal, wrapped in cloth, with a note. "You're not alone, sister. We've got your six." Civil rights attorney Monica Pierre, who had worked on military discrimination cases in the past, volunteered to take Aisha's case pro bono. Her statement was clear. "We will not let her sacrifice be buried beneath police incompetence. We will fight this." That night, national news finally picked up the story. On Newsline Tonight, anchor Jenna Reynolds addressed the nation. "A war hero, a wrongful arrest, in a courtroom that may soon face the consequences of a systemic failure." Inside her cell, Aisha sat upright on the edge of the metal bench. She could hear the buzz growing in the hallway, the flurry of phone calls, the hurried footsteps, the shift in tone. A guard passed by, avoiding eye contact before murmuring, "Your lawyer's here." Aisha stood, cracked her neck gently, and walked out of the cell with silent grace. The world finally knew her name, and the court wasn't ready for what came next. The sun had barely risen over Glenn County Courthouse, but a line had already formed outside its grand, faded marble entrance. Veterans in uniform, local activists, journalists with notepads in hand, and everyday citizens filled the sidewalk. Some carried signs. Others wore shirts with Aisha's face printed next to the Marine Corps emblem. Everyone was talking about the same thing. What would happen to Sergeant Major Aisha Brooks? Inside, the tension was palpable. The courtroom itself was modest. Oak benches, a high bench for the judge, and the flags of Georgia and the United States standing like solemn sentinels behind the dais. The room was packed. Camera crews had been banned from entering, but reporters scribbled in real time, their pens flying across paper. The district attorney, clearly unprepared for the media circus, sat stiffly at his desk, flipping nervously through a manila folder. Aisha sat calmly at the defendant's table, now dressed in a plain black blazer and slacks, her wrists still bearing faint red marks from the cuffs. Shadow, her service dog, lay quietly at her feet, alert and observant. Her attorney, Monica Pierre, whispered to her occasionally, but Aisha barely responded. Her eyes scanned the courtroom with the slow precision of someone trained to measure threat and intention. Despite everything, she did not slouch. She did not fidget. She held herself with a quiet strength that unsettled even the most confident onlookers. Across the aisle sat officers Holt and Daniels. Holt looked annoyed, arms folded tightly, as if all this attention was nothing but an inconvenience. Daniels, however, looked uncomfortable, his gaze flickering between Aisha and the floor, clearly shaken by the backlash. The judge, Harold Penwell, entered briskly. An older white man in his late 60s, he adjusted his glasses and surveyed the room. He cleared his throat, more aware than usual of the weight of the moment. "This court will now come to order. The matter of Brooks versus the state of Georgia." Monica Pierre rose. "Your Honor, we move to have all charges dropped immediately based on overwhelming evidence of wrongful arrest and violation of civil rights, including failure to properly identify and respect Ms. Brooks' military credentials. The district attorney stood. Your Honor, the state is still investigating the facts. While we acknowledge new information has come to light, we request more time to assess the details of Ms. Brooks' alleged impersonation. Alleged? Monica cut in, her voice sharp. Her service record is public. Her ID was confiscated but ignored. She was manhandled in public without probable cause. She holds a Bronze Star, Your Honor, a sniper's certification, and she was cuffed on a bakery floor while trying to buy coffee. The judge raised a hand. Ms. Pierre, I understand your passion, but let me make that decision. He turned to the district attorney. Is it true you've been in contact with military officials since yesterday? The DA hesitated. We have received communication from a few individuals, yes. At that moment, a faint murmur began at the back of the room. The double doors creaked open. Heads turned. A tall figure stepped into the courtroom. Dressed in full marine dress blues, his chest covered in rows of medals and ribbons, walked none other than General Marcus Ellsworth. His presence filled the room. Even Judge Penwell sat back slightly, visibly stunned. The bailiff stepped forward, unsure of what to do, but the general raised one hand gently. If I may, Your Honor. The judge blinked. You are? General Marcus J. Ellsworth, United States Marine Corps, retired. I served as commanding officer to Sergeant Major Aisha Brooks for 3 years. I'm here today to speak directly to the court. A hush blanketed the room. Not even a pen scratched paper. The judge nodded slowly. Very well. Proceed. The general walked toward the bench, his gait firm, posture immaculate. He paused, turned to the courtroom, and then locked eyes with Aisha. I watched this woman carry wounded men out of firefights while bullets tore past her head, he said, voice gravelly but resolute. She saved American lives. She trained over 60 snipers, including 2 of my own officers. She is a Marine through and through, and what happened to her, what you allowed to happen, was a disgrace. Gasps rippled through the audience. Officer Daniels stared at the floor. Holt clenched his jaw. I am here, Ellsworth continued, because a court should recognize not just her innocence, but her sacrifice. He turned to the judge. If any doubt remains about her identity, I'll sign an affidavit right now, and if you intend to continue prosecuting her, then understand, this court will be hearing from the Pentagon next. Silence. Aisha didn't flinch. She simply lowered her head once, respectfully. The general returned the gesture. The room was no longer just a courtroom. It had become a reckoning. The silence that followed General Marcus Ellsworth's words was heavier than any gavel strike. No one moved. Not the reporters, not the officers, not even the judge. Judge Penwell cleared his throat, suddenly aware that all eyes were on him, but also that the moment was bigger than him. General Ellsworth, your remarks are on the record. The general nodded once, as they should be. He then turned from the bench and walked toward Aisha. She didn't expect it. She hadn't seen the general in over a year, since her discharge ceremony, where he had given her a coin engraved with the words precision, honor, resilience. She still carried it in her jacket. Now, the same man who once led battalions across enemy lines was walking straight toward her defense table, removing his cap and placing it over his heart. I'm sorry, Sergeant Major, he said quietly, his voice now carrying the weight of personal regret. We failed you. I failed you. The entire courtroom watched as this 4-star general, one of the most revered figures in modern Marine history, apologized not with spectacle, but with sincerity. Aisha gave a small nod, her voice low but clear. You didn't fail me, sir. The country did. The badge did. He nodded once in return. Then we'll fix it. Across the room, Officer Daniels was visibly shaken now. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for a pen on the table, but never picked it up. Holt, still defiant, leaned toward the DA and whispered something under his breath, but the DA offered no response. His expression was pale, stunned, eyes darting between the general and the press gallery. The judge leaned forward. In light of the statements from General Ellsworth, the overwhelming evidence of Sergeant Major Brooks's identity and service record, and the fact that her rights were disregarded from the moment of her arrest, I am dismissing all charges immediately. There was no applause, but there didn't need to be. The moment was sacred. Aisha exhaled quietly, the first deep breath she had taken in days. Monica Pierre placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, whispering, "It's over." But Aisha shook her head. "No, it's just starting." Reporters exploded into motion outside the courtroom as word spread. Social media buzzed with updates. Breaking. All charges dropped against Marine sniper Aisha Brooks after four-star general walks into courtroom. General Ellsworth delivers powerful apology. Nation watches in awe. She served too, should justice for Aisha. Outside the courthouse, the protest crowd had doubled in size. Veterans stood at attention, saluting as Aisha exited through the front doors, flanked by Monica and General Ellsworth. Shadow walked calmly at her side, his vest now fully visible. Service dog, PTSD, combat veteran. The crowd parted as she stepped forward. One older black woman in the front row, tears on her cheeks, whispered, "We're proud of you, baby." Aisha nodded in acknowledgement, but didn't stop. She was still processing, still steadying herself. A man in a wheelchair raised a Marine flag as she passed, and someone behind him began humming the Marine's hymn. Others joined quietly. It wasn't a chant, it wasn't a rally, it was reverence. As they reached the press barricade, a CNN reporter asked loudly, "Sergeant Brooks, do you have any comment for the officers who arrested you?" Aisha paused, then looked directly into the camera. "I fought for this country so we could wear our uniforms with pride, not so we could be judged by the color of our skin when we're out of them. I don't want revenge, I want reform." Another reporter asked, "What will you do next?" She turned slightly toward Monica, then back to the crowd. "We'll see, but I know this, I'm not going quiet." General Ellsworth leaned in, "And you won't have to fight alone." As the cameras continued to flash, as the chants began again from across the street, Aisha stood firm, not just a veteran, not just a symbol, but a soldier in a new kind of battle, one where the enemy wasn't across the ocean. It was right here, wearing a badge, holding a gavel, walking past veterans without seeing them. But now the world had seen her, and they weren't going to forget. The following morning, the sun rose over Glenwood Park to a changed America. What had started as a quiet case of police overreach had evolved into a national reckoning. Cable news loops replayed the moment General Ellsworth stood in that courtroom. Social media feeds were flooded with stills of Aisha standing tall beside her attorney and service dog. Her face, once shoved to the pavement, was now the face of a movement. By noon, the Glenn County Police Department held an emergency press conference outside their headquarters. A row of uniformed officers stood stiffly behind Police Chief Everett Langley, who gripped the sides of his podium as if bracing for a storm. "I want to begin by offering a formal apology," he said, eyes flicking toward the rows of reporters. "To Sergeant Major Aisha Brooks, her family, her fellow service members, and the citizens of this county, we failed. What happened should never happen to anyone, least of all a decorated veteran who risked her life for this country." He paused, clearing his throat. "The two arresting officers have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We are cooperating with the Department of Justice and an independent review panel. Our department is also initiating mandatory racial bias training for all current officers effective immediately." When asked why officers ignored Aisha's military identification, Langley answered, "There's no excuse, only failure." Though his words were measured, the pressure was undeniable. Aisha had become more than a victim. She had become a symbol of accountability overdue. Across town, Aisha sat with Monica Pierre in a hotel room arranged for her protection. She hadn't been home since the arrest, and her phone buzzed constantly with messages of support. Celebrities, senators, retired generals, all reaching out to offer words of solidarity or seek permission to amplify her voice. Shadow rested beside her on the hotel bed, his head on her lap, sensing her quiet turmoil. "I didn't ask for any of this," Aisha said softly, scrolling through a text message from a fellow Marine she hadn't seen in years. "I just wanted to buy a damn coffee." Monica nodded, her voice equally low. "You didn't ask for it, but maybe you're exactly who we needed." Later that day, Aisha was invited to speak at a veterans town hall hosted by CNN. She initially refused, still exhausted and emotionally drained, but it was General Ellsworth who convinced her. "You don't have to shout," he told her on the phone. "You just have to speak the truth. That's more powerful than 1,000 rifles." So she went. The event was held in Atlanta, live streamed across multiple networks. Aisha walked on stage with quiet authority. No medals, no uniform. Just a black woman in jeans, combat boots, and a plain white blouse. Her posture was impeccable, her words steady. She told the crowd about Fallujah, about watching friends die, about being the only woman in sniper training and earning her place twice over. But then she spoke about the bakery, the cuffs, the disbelief in the eyes of men who refused to see her for what she was. "I served with pride," she said, "but I came home invisible. Not because I lacked honor, but because I wore the wrong skin. The room went still. Let's be honest, she continued. If I were white, this would have been a misunderstanding. Not a headline, not a trauma, not a scar I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. A thunderous standing ovation followed, but Aisha didn't smile. She simply nodded once and stepped down from the podium. Backstage, General Ellsworth met her with a quiet embrace. You didn't speak like a soldier, he said. You spoke like a leader. That night, news outlets hailed her address as one of the most honest indictments of systemic bias in policing they'd ever aired. The words Sergeant Major Brooks began trending globally. Thousands of letters poured into the Marine Corps' headquarters, some apologizing, some demanding change. Even Capitol Hill took notice. A bipartisan group of lawmakers announced they were drafting the Brooks Act, aimed at creating a national verification system for veterans and expanding penalties for wrongful detainment of service members. And in Glenn County, the bakery where it all began placed a laminated photo of Aisha at the register. Underneath it read, "This is what a real American hero looks like." Weeks passed, but the momentum didn't fade. Aisha Brooks' name was now etched into the nation's conscience, not as a soundbite or a viral moment, but as a living, breathing reminder of dignity under fire. Her story wasn't reduced to outrage alone. It became a call to action, a shift in how people talked about veterans, race, and accountability. She returned to Glenwood Park eventually, not because it felt safe, but because she refused to let fear or injustice force her out of the place she called home. Her house, a modest two-bedroom on a quiet cul-de-sac, had been flooded with cards, flowers, banners, and flags left by neighbors and strangers alike. One envelope stood out. It contained a hand-drawn portrait of her in shadow with a child's scrawled note, "Thank you for protecting us." Aisha stared at it longer than she expected. It reminded her why she had signed up all those years ago. Not for medals, not for recognition, but because some people need protecting. From enemies abroad, yes, but also from the slow erosion of justice at home. The two officers involved in her arrest faced formal disciplinary hearings. Officer Daniels, the younger of the two, publicly apologized during a press conference. His voice cracked as he acknowledged his failure to act, to listen, to trust what was right in front of him. "I saw a threat when I should have seen a hero," he said, "and I'll carry that mistake for the rest of my life." Officer Holt refused to apologize and was eventually terminated for misconduct in violating department procedures. His dismissal made headlines, but Aisha didn't celebrate it. She wasn't interested in revenge, only in consequence. Meanwhile, the Brooks Act gained momentum on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle recognized the urgency. The bill proposed a nationwide system allowing officers to verify veteran status on the spot, mandatory anti-bias training for law enforcement, and stronger penalties for civil rights violations against service members. During the committee hearing, Aisha testified before Congress. It wasn't a fiery speech. It was steady, firm, and devastatingly real. "Veterans don't stop being soldiers when we hang up our uniforms," she told them. "We don't lose our honor when we come home. Don't let the next person in my shoes end up in shackles instead of a salute." The bill passed its first round unanimously. Back in Georgia, the city council declared the day of her courtroom exoneration as Sergeant Major Aisha Brooks Day. The bakery owner, who had witnessed the arrest firsthand, renamed her signature raisin bread the Sniper's Slice in Aisha's honor. An inside joke she surprisingly welcomed. But the biggest moment came when she received a personal invitation to the Pentagon. She arrived dressed in a black Marine dress uniform, medals shining across her chest, shadow at her heel. General Ellsworth stood waiting for her, flanked by a row of Marine officers standing at attention. No cameras, no press, just a quiet room filled with the men and women who had always known what she was. He stepped forward and presented her with a special commendation, created specifically for her, the Valor at Home citation, for extraordinary service to the nation both in combat and in civilian life, exemplifying courage, integrity, and leadership in the face of injustice. As the medal was pinned to her chest, Aisha met his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a full smile. Afterward, they stood alone for a few minutes. "Do you regret coming back?" he asked softly. Aisha shook her head. "No, I regret that this is what I came back to, but not that I came home." He nodded. "And what now?" "I build," she said. "Something better." And she meant it. In the months that followed, Aisha launched Operation Honor, a nonprofit dedicated to advocating for veterans of color, offering legal assistance, transition support, and public education programs. Her story was taught in police academies. Her testimony was cited in debates about criminal justice reform, and her face became a symbol not of victimhood, but of resilience. Sometimes she still walked to that same bakery, shadow by her side. People would wave, sometimes pause in awe, unsure of what to say. But Aisha didn't need words. She simply nodded, held the door open for the next person, and kept moving, because she was never in it for the praise. She was in it for the fight, the same way she always had been. Only this time the battlefield was home, and she was winning.